The champagne flute didn't just fall, it was dropped, shattering the silence of the ballroom the moment she walked in. Everyone told Marcus Thorne that bringing his 23-year-old mistress to the annual shareholders' gala was a bold move. He called it a power play. He thought he was untouchable, the future CEO of the company. But he forgot one thing: the woman he destroyed to get there wasn't staying buried in the past. When the door swung open, it wasn't just an ex-wife walking in. It was a reckoning in red silk. And when the most powerful billionaire in the room walked past Marcus to take her hand. That was just the beginning of the end. The crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom in New York City hummed with the kind of light that only money could buy. It was the night of the Vanguard Global Annual Gala, an event where stock prices were manipulated over canapes and careers were made or destroyed between sips of Dom Perignon. Marcus Thorne adjusted his silk bow tie in the reflection of a darkened window, satisfied with what he saw. At 38, he was the vice president of sales for Vanguard Global, and rumors were swirling that tonight the aging CEO, Arthur Penhaligon, would finally announce his successor. Marcus had the numbers, he had the charisma, and he had the ambition. "Babe, stop looking at yourself. You're making the waiters nervous," a high-pitched voice giggled beside him. Marcus turned to see Tiffany Ray, clutching his arm with a possessive grip. Tiffany was 23, a former marketing intern at Vanguard, and the reason Marcus's 10-year marriage had imploded 6 months ago. She was wearing a dress that was perhaps a shade too bright, a neon fuchsia that clashed aggressively with the understated elegance of the room, and a neckline that plunged dangerously low. "I'm not looking at myself, Tiff," Marcus lied, flashing his signature shark-like grin. "I'm looking at the future. This is it. Tonight, I take the throne." Tiffany pouted, tracing a finger down his lapel. "And when you're CEO, do I get an office with a view? Or maybe just a credit card with no limit?" "You get whatever you want," Marcus murmured, though his eyes were already scanning the room, looking for board members to charm. Bringing Tiffany was a calculated risk. His divorce from Eleanor was messy. It had been finalized only 3 weeks ago. Eleanor had been the good wife, supportive, quiet, the one who proofread his reports at 2 a.m. and raised their daughter while he climbed the corporate ladder. But Elena was plain. She was safe. Tiffany was a trophy, a signal to the other wolves in the room that Marcus took what he wanted. However, as they moved deeper into the room, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused, heads turned. It wasn't the admiration Marcus was used to, it was scrutiny. "Is that the intern?" He heard a whisper from a cluster of wives near the ice sculpture. "The ink isn't even dry on the divorce papers," another voice murmured. "Disgraceful." Marcus stiffened. He squeezed Tiffany's arm a little too hard. "Smile," he hissed under his breath, "and stand up straight." "You're hurting me," Tiffany whined, pulling away slightly. "Why are they staring? Is it the dress? I told you it was a killer dress." "They're staring because they're jealous," Marcus said, though a cold drop of sweat trickled down his spine. He spotted George Holloway, the CFO, and steered Tiffany toward him. George was an old-school guy, family-oriented. This would be the test. "George!" Marcus boomed, extending a hand. "Great turnout, isn't it?" George Holloway turned, his face hardening instantly as his eyes flicked from Marcus to Tiffany. He didn't take Marcus's hand immediately. "Marcus, Miss Ray, is it?" "Tiffany, please!" She beamed, oblivious to the chill in the air. "Bold choice, Marcus," George said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "Bringing a guest so soon, especially with the merger rumors." "The merger is just gossip, George," Marcus laughed, trying to project confidence. "Besides, Life moves on. I'm focused on the future of Vanguard." "Are you?" George took a sip of his scotch. "Because word is, the new potential partners value stability, integrity, character." Before Marcus could retort, a hush fell over the room. It wasn't the gradual quiet of a speech beginning. It was the sudden, sucked-in breath of 300 people simultaneously stunned into silence. The main double doors at the top of the grand staircase had swung open. Usually this entrance was reserved for Arthur Penhaligon, the CEO, but Arthur was already at the bar. Marcus frowned, irritated that someone was upstaging him. "Who is that?" Tiffany asked, squinting. "She looks like a movie star." Marcus followed Tiffany's gaze up the staircase, and his heart hammered against his ribs. He blinked, sure that the lighting was playing tricks on him. Standing at the top of the stairs was a woman. She was wearing a gown of deep, liquid emerald velvet that hugged every curve of her body, with a slit that ran up her thigh, tasteful, yet devastating. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun during their marriage, cascaded in glossy, dark waves over one shoulder. She wore diamonds at her throat, real ones, heavy enough to sink a ship. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor he had left crying at the kitchen table. It wasn't the Eleanor who wore oversized sweaters to hide the weight she was too tired to lose. This was a queen surveying her kingdom. "No," Marcus whispered, the blood draining from his face. "That's impossible." The click of her heels against the marble stairs echoed like gunshots in the silent ballroom. Elena Vance descended slowly, her chin held high, her expression unreadable. Marcus felt paralyzed. In the 10 years they had been married, he had never seen her look like this. He had convinced himself that she was nothing without him. He had told his friends that she was holding him back, that she was a boring, stay-at-home mum who didn't understand his world. Seeing her now, commanding the attention of New York's elite without saying a word, shattered his reality. "Marcus!" Tiffany tugged on his sleeve, her voice laced with panic. Is that your ex-wife?" "Shut up!" Marcus snapped, unable to tear his eyes away. As Eleanor reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. It wasn't just respect, it was curiosity mixed with awe. Why was the discarded wife here? How did she get an invite? The security at the Vanguard Gala was tighter than the Pentagon. You didn't just crash this event. She began to move through the crowd, and Marcus watched in horror as people who had shunned him moments ago, the wives of the board members, the high-level investors, greeted her warmly. "Elena, darling, you look magnificent." It was Mrs. Halloway, George's wife. She embraced Elena, kissing her on both cheeks. "Thank you, Margaret." Elena's voice floated through the air, smooth and confident. "It's been too long. How is your grandson?" Marcus felt a surge of irrational anger. She knows them. Since when does she know Margaret Halloway? During their marriage, Marcus had always kept Eleanor separate from his work life, claiming she wouldn't fit in. Now, it seemed, she fit in better than he did. He had to stop this. She was obviously here to cause a scene, to embarrass him in front of the board before the CEO announcement. He couldn't let her ruin his night. "Stay here," Marcus ordered Tiffany, shaking off her hand. "But Marcus..." "I said stay here." He straightened his jacket and marched across the room, cutting through the crowd. He needed to intercept her before she got to the CEO. He needed to throw her out. He caught up to her near the orchestra. "Elena." She stopped mid-stride and turned slowly. Her eyes, usually warm and brown, were cold. They swept over him, then flickered briefly to where Tiffany was standing by the buffet, looking lost and tacky in her neon dress. "Marcus," she said. Her tone was bored. "I see you brought the reason for our divorce." "How quaint. What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus hissed, lowering his voice so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "This is a private corporate event, Elena. Security is going to drag you out, and I don't want to be embarrassed when they do." Elena laughed softly. It was a dark, rich sound. "Embarrassed? Marcus, you brought a 20-year-old intern to the biggest business night of the year. You've done a fine job of embarrassing yourself without my help." "I'm the VP of sales," Marcus snarled, his face flushing red. "I belong here. You're a housewife who's living off my alimony checks. Did you spend the first check on this dress, trying to win me back?" He expected her to flinch. He expected the tears that always used to come when he raised his voice. Instead, Elena stepped closer, invading his personal space. She smelled of expensive jasmine and danger. "Win you back," she whispered, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Marcus, looking at you now, sweaty, desperate, wearing a suit that's a season out of style. I honestly wonder how I tolerated you for a decade. You—" "And as for the alimony," she interrupted, "I haven't touched a cent. I donated it all to a charity for women starting over. I don't need your money." "Then how?" Marcus gestured frantically at her diamonds, her dress. "Who is paying for this? Who are you sleeping with?" Elena's expression hardened. "Careful, Marcus. You're standing on a trap door and you don't even know who has the lever." Before Marcus could respond, a booming voice echoed from the stage at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." It was Arthur Penhaligon, the CEO. The room went silent. Marcus panicked. The announcement was happening. He had to be at the front. He had to look like the successor. "We're done here." Marcus sneered at Elena. "Get out before security throws you out." He turned his back on her and rushed toward the stage, grabbing Tiffany on the way. "Look happy," he commanded her. "This is it." Elena watched him go, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She took a sip of champagne. "He really has no idea, does he?" A deep, gravelly voice said from behind her. Elena didn't turn. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had saved her when her world fell apart. "No," Elena replied softly. "He thinks he's the main character of this story. He's about to find out he's just the villain." On stage, Arthur Penhaligon cleared his throat. "As you know, Vanguard Global has been looking for a strategic partner, a force to take us into the next century. Tonight, I am not just announcing a successor, I am announcing an acquisition." Marcus froze. Acquisition? That wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to be promoted, not merged. "Vanguard Global has been acquired," Arthur continued, his face pale but smiling, "by the Blackwood Consortium." A collective gasp ripped through the room. The Blackwood Consortium was a myth, a financial empire run by Julian Blackwood, a man who was notoriously private, ruthlessly efficient, and wealthier than God. "And," Arthur said, gesturing to the back of the room, "Mr. Blackwood is here tonight to introduce his new board of directors." The heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened again. Marcus spun around, his heart pounding. If Blackwood was here, he needed to impress him. He needed to show he was the top dog at Vanguard. But Julian Blackwood didn't walk in alone. He walked in with a security detail that looked like special forces and an air of authority that made Marcus feel like a child. Julian was tall, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes like cold steel. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Marcus's car. He walked straight past the line of eager executives. He walked straight past Marcus, who had his hand extended for a handshake. Julian Blackwood stopped directly in front of Eleanor. The room went dead silent. Marcus watched, his mouth hanging open, as the terrifying billionaire softened his expression. Julian reached out, taking Elena's hand in his, and bowed his head slightly. "I believe," Julian said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "that you promised me the first dance, Mrs. Vance." Elena smiled, and for the first time that night it was genuine. "I believe I did, Mr. Blackwood." The orchestra began to play a Viennese waltz, the swelling strings filling the vacuum of silence in the grand ballroom. Marcus Thorne stood rooted to the spot, his mouth tasting like ash. He watched as Julian Blackwood, a man whose net worth could buy small countries, placed a hand firmly on Eleanor's waist. Eleanor placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch familiar and easy, as if they had done this 1,000 times. They moved across the floor with a fluidity that made everyone else look like clumsy amateurs. Eleanor's emerald dress swirled around her, catching the light, making her look like a living jewel. "Marcus!" Tiffany whined, pulling on his arm again. She had noticed the shift in the room's energy. Nobody was looking at her neon pink dress anymore. They were looking at the woman Marcus had thrown away. "Why is that old guy dancing with your ex? Is he rich?" Marcus yanked his arm away, his eyes narrowed into slits. "Rich? Tiffany, that is Julian Blackwood. He's the predator at the top of the food chain. If he's here, it means Vanguard is under his thumb." "So?" Tiffany shrugged. "Go talk to him. You're the VP. Tell him to stop dancing with her." "It's not that simple," Marcus snapped, his voice rising enough to draw a few scowls from nearby guests. He couldn't understand it. Elena was ordinary. That was why he married her. She was safe, domestic, and uncomplicated. She made pot roasts and clipped coupons. She didn't know how to waltz with billionaires. She didn't know how to wear diamonds that looked like they belonged in the Tower of London. Or did she? On the dance floor, the conversation was far more intimate. "You're enjoying this," Julian murmured, his lips brushing her ear as he spun her. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. Elena looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. "Is it a crime to enjoy justice, Julian? You saw his face. He looks like he swallowed a lemon whole." "He looks like a man realizing he sold a diamond to buy a rhinestone," Julian corrected, glancing briefly at Tiffany, who was currently trying to take a selfie with a disinterested waiter. "Are you sure you want to go through with the rest of the plan? We can stop now. You've made your point." Elena's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly. "No. He didn't just leave me, Julian. He erased me. For 10 years, I fixed his spreadsheets, I wrote his speeches, I gave him the strategy that got him promoted to VP, and when he got the title, he told me I wasn't corporate material. He told me I was an anchor, dragging him down. I need him to know exactly who the anchor was." Julian's eyes softened. He pulled her imperceptibly closer. "Then let's burn his kingdom down, my love." The music swelled to a crescendo. In a move that shocked the conservative crowd of Vanguard Global, Julian dipped Elena low. It was a passionate, theatrical move. And then, as she rose, Elena didn't pull away. She leaned in and pressed her lips to Julian's. It wasn't a polite peck. It was a claim. It was a kiss that spoke of intimacy, power, and a shared secret. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the gut. He dropped his champagne glass. It didn't break on the carpet, but the liquid splashed over his polished shoes. She kissed him," Marcus stammered. "Wow," Tiffany said, actually impressed. "She's got game." Marcus saw red. Rationality left the building. He forgot about the merger. He forgot about his career. All he saw was his property, because in his mind, Elena was still his, being touched by another man. He stormed onto the dance floor. "Marcus, no!" George Halloway whispered as Marcus brushed past him. But it was too late. Marcus marched right up to the couple as the music faded. "Get your hands off her." The room went deadly quiet. The other dancers stopped. The orchestra hesitated. Julian Blackwood slowly turned his head. He didn't release Elena. He kept his arm possessively around her waist, looking at Marcus with the mild annoyance of a lion dealing with a buzzing fly. "I beg your pardon?" Julian said, his voice ice-cold. "You heard me," Marcus spat, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "This is a company event, not a brothel. Elena, stop making a fool of yourself and get out. You don't belong here." Elena stepped out of Julian's hold, but she didn't retreat. She stepped toward Marcus. She was wearing heels, making her almost eye-level with him. "I don't belong here," Elena repeated, her voice calm and amplified by the acoustics of the silent ballroom. "That's funny, Marcus, because according to the invitation list, I'm the guest of honor. You, on the other hand, are listed as staff." Titters of laughter broke out in the crowd. Marcus flushed a deep purple. "I am the Vice President of Sales," he shouted, losing control. "I built this company's revenue for the last 3 years. I am the reason we are standing here. And you're nothing. You're a housewife who doesn't even know how to use Excel." Elena tilted her head. "Is that so? Who fixed the Q3 projections in 2022 when you messed up the pivot tables, Marcus? Who rewrote the pitch for the Anderson account when you were too hungover to type? Who told you to invest in the logistics infrastructure before the market shifted?" Marcus froze. His eyes darted around the room. He had taken credit for all of that. "You typed what I told you to type," Marcus lied, though his voice wavered. "You were a secretary at best." Julian Blackwood stepped forward, his massive frame eclipsing Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, you seem to be laboring under a delusion. You believe you are the asset Vanguard Global wants to keep." "I am the asset," Marcus insisted, puffing out his chest. "If you're acquiring us, you need me. I know the clients." Julian smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. "I didn't buy Vanguard for the clients, Mr. Thorne. I bought it for the intellectual property and for the leadership." Julian turned to the stage, where Arthur Penhaligon was waiting nervously. Julian nodded. "Arthur," Julian called out, "why don't we skip dinner and get straight to the announcement? Mr. Thorne seems eager to know where he stands." The ballroom was rearranged hastily. The waiters, sensing the tension, moved with supernatural speed to clear the dance floor and set up rows of chairs facing the stage. Marcus found himself pushed to the periphery. The seat with his name tag was no longer at the head table. It was at table 42, the table usually reserved for junior associates and the IT support staff, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Tiffany sat down, looking miserable. "This table doesn't even have the good wine," she complained, poking at the centerpiece. "And why is everyone looking at us like we have a disease?" "Be quiet," Marcus hissed, his eyes glued to the stage. "It's a mistake, a hazing ritual. They're testing me." But his stomach was churning. He watched as Eleanor Vance walked up the stairs to the stage. She didn't sit in the audience. She sat in the center chair, right next to the podium. Julian Blackwood sat on her right. Arthur Penhaligon sat on her left. "Why is she up there?" Tiffany whispered. "Is she like the mascot?" Arthur Penhaligon approached the microphone. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been outmaneuvered and was just grateful to be allowed to retire with his pension. "As I stated earlier," Arthur began, his voice trembling slightly, "Vanguard has been acquired by the Blackwood Consortium. But this deal was not a hostile takeover. It was a strategic partnership initiated by a silent stakeholder who has been guiding our movements from the shadows for the last 5 years. Marcus frowned. Silent stakeholder? He knew all the major shareholders. This individual, Arthur continued, saw the flaws in our management. She saw the inefficiencies in our sales department. Arthur refused to make eye contact with Marcus at table 42, and she quietly began accumulating voting rights through shell companies, preparing for a restructuring that would save us from bankruptcy. Bankruptcy? Marcus scoffed. The company was doing fine. He had hit his targets. We were bleeding money, Arthur admitted, as if reading Marcus's mind. The sales numbers were inflated by risky short-term deals. Deals, he paused, orchestrated by our VP of sales. The room turned to look at Marcus. He felt the heat rising up his neck. Those deals were genius. They brought in cash fast. The Blackwood Consortium agreed to step in only on one condition, Arthur said, that the person who identified the rot, the person who actually understands the long-term vision of this company, takes the helm as the new chairwoman of the board. Arthur gestured to the woman in the emerald dress. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the majority shareholder of Vanguard Global, Ms. Elena Vance. The applause was thunderous, led by Julian Blackwood himself. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. The noise of the clapping sounded like roaring water in his ears. Majority shareholder? That's impossible, Marcus shouted, standing up. He knocked his chair over. She's broke. I gave her a pitiful settlement. She doesn't have money. Elena stood up. She approached the microphone. She didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She looked like a judge delivering a sentence. You're right, Marcus, Elena said into the mic. I didn't have money. My parents were teachers. When we met, I was a broke student. She looked out over the crowd, her eyes locking onto his. But I had a grandfather I never mentioned to you. You never asked about my family, remember? You said they were irrelevant to your career. A few gasps from the crowd. My grandfather was Silas Vance, Elena revealed. The name dropped like a bomb. Silas Vance was an oil tycoon from Texas, a legend who died 10 years ago. Everyone assumed his fortune had been donated or lost. He left everything to me in a trust, Elena explained, accessible only when I turned 30 or if I got divorced. The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I didn't touch it because I wanted to build a life with you, Marcus. I wanted us to be partners. I tried to help you with your work because I loved you, and I happened to have a double degree in economics and strategic management. Something else you never bothered to ask about. Marcus stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He remembered now. The framed diplomas in the garage. He had told her to pack them away because they cluttered the space he needed for his golf clubs. But, Elena continued, her voice sharpening, when you brought a 23-year-old intern into our bed, when you told me I was too old, too boring, and too stupid to understand your world, I decided it was time to access the trust. She gestured to Julian. I called Mr. Blackwood. We had met once, years ago, at a charity gala you refused to attend. I pitched him a plan to save Vanguard from your reckless sales strategies. He agreed. We've been buying stock for 6 months. Every time you insulted me during the divorce mediation, I bought another 1,000 shares. Elena leaned into the microphone, a cruel smile playing on her lips. So, thank you, Marcus. Your cruelty literally bought me this company. The room erupted. Some people were laughing, others were applauding in shock. Marcus looked at Tiffany. She was staring at Elena with wide, admiring eyes. She owns the company? Tiffany asked slowly. Shut up, Marcus screamed. He looked around wildly. He had to fix this. This was a nightmare. He scrambled away from the table and ran toward the stage. Security guards stepped forward, but Julian raised a hand to stop them. He wanted to see this. Marcus reached the edge of the stage, looking up at Eleanor like a beggar. "Eleanor, honey," he panted, his face slick with sweat. "Look, this is a big misunderstanding. I didn't mean those things. The stress, the job, it got to me. But we were a team. We can still be a team. I can run sales for you. I know the team better than anyone." Eleanor looked down at him. It was the look one gives to a cockroach before stepping on it. "Run sales?" Elena asked. "Marcus, didn't you check your email before you walked in tonight?" "My email?" "Your company email," Elena said pleasantly. "I had IT deactivate your access at 6 p.m., but before they did, they sent a termination notice." "Termination?" Marcus choked. "You're fired, Marcus," Elena said, her voice ringing with finality, "for gross negligence, conflict of interest, and, oh yes, bringing a non-vetted civilian into a confidential shareholder meeting." She pointed at Tiffany. "Escort Mr. Thorne out," Elena commanded the security team. "And his guest." "Wait!" Tiffany yelled, jumping up. She looked at Marcus, then at the billionaire on stage. She made a split-second calculation. She ripped her hand away from Marcus. "I'm not with him!" Tiffany shouted, running toward the stage. "He lied to me. He told me he was going to be CEO. I didn't know he was a loser. Elena, Ms. Vance, I can type. I can get coffee. Don't kick me out." The humiliation was total. Even his mistress was defecting in real time. "Get them both out," Julian Blackwood ordered, his voice like thunder. Two massive guards grabbed Marcus by the arms. As they dragged him backward, kicking and screaming about his rights, he watched Elena turn back to Julian. Julian took her hand, kissed the knuckles, and whispered something that made her laugh, a free, happy laugh that Marcus hadn't heard in years. The doors slammed shut, leaving Marcus in the cold hallway of the Plaza Hotel. But the story wasn't over. Marcus Thorne wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who got even. And he knew one thing about Eleanor. She had a soft spot for their daughter, Lily. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were full of malice. "You want war, Elena?" he whispered to the closed doors. "I'll give you war." The harsh fluorescent light of the motel room flickered, casting long, jittery shadows against the peeling beige wallpaper. It was a far cry from the penthouse suite Marcus Thorne was used to, but after his corporate credit cards were declined at 3 different hotels, the roadside inn was his only option. He paced the small room, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. On the bed sat a man named Barry Slocum, a freelance journalist known for destroying reputations for the right price. "So let me get this straight," Slocum said, tapping on his iPad with a greasy finger. "You're saying the new owner of Vanguard Global, this Elena Vance, didn't just inherit the money? You're saying she conspired with Julian Blackwood to steal the company from you while you were still married?" "It's worse than that," Marcus lied smoothly. He had always been a good salesman, and this was the pitch of his life. They were having an affair for years. While I was working 18-hour days to build that company, she was funneling my proprietary strategies to Blackwood. She used me, Barry. She's a predator. And now she's trying to take my daughter. Slocum grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Billionaire tycoon and adulterous housewife destroy local hero." That's the headline. The public hates the elite, Marcus. They'll eat this up. But I need proof about the daughter. Marcus stopped pacing. He pulled out a crumpled legal document. It was a hastily drafted emergency custody order. "She's living with Blackwood now," Marcus said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. a man known for his ruthless appetites. I am filing for emergency full custody tomorrow morning on the grounds of moral endangerment. I'm a father fighting for his little girl against a Goliath. Slocum snapped a picture of the document. This goes live in an hour. By tomorrow morning, Elena Vance won't be the Queen of New York. She'll be a pariah. The next morning, the world exploded. Elena Vance sat in the sunroom of Julian Blackwood's expansive Long Island estate. The view of the ocean was usually calming, but today the serenity was shattered by the television screen. Shocking allegations against the new chairwoman of Vanguard Global, the news anchor announced. Disgraced executive Marcus Thorne claims he was the victim of a corporate coup and a broken marriage orchestrated by billionaire Julian Blackwood. Furthermore, Thorne alleges he is being blocked from seeing his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Elena dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, the dark liquid spreading like a stain. "He wouldn't," she whispered. "He ignored Lily for years. He missed her birthdays. He didn't even know the name of her school." Julian entered the room, his face grim. He was already on the phone. "Kill the story. I don't care how much it costs. Buy the paper if you have to." He hung up and looked at Eleanor. "It's trending everywhere. He's playing the victim card perfectly." "He doesn't want Lily," Eleanor said, shaking. "He wants leverage. He knows she's the only thing I value more than my dignity." Just then, the front gate intercom buzzed. It was the estate security. "Mr. Blackwood, we have police at the gate, and a Child Protective Services agent. They have a court order." Elena's blood ran cold. She ran to the window. Outside the massive iron gates, a swarm of paparazzi cameras flashed like lightning. A police cruiser was pushing through the crowd. "He got an emergency injunction," Julian realized, his fists clenching. "He must have found a judge who hates me, or one he bribed." "They can't take her," Elena cried, rushing toward the stairs where Lily was still sleeping. "She doesn't even know him. He's a stranger to her." But the law was a blunt instrument. 20 minutes later, Eleanor stood in the driveway, tears streaming down her face, as a stern-faced social worker led a confused and crying Lily into a government vehicle. "Mommy!" Lily screamed, reaching out the window. "Where are they taking me? I want to stay with you." "It's just for a few days, baby," Elena choked out, held back by Julian's arm. "I promise, I'm coming to get you." Marcus was there, too. He stood by his rental car, wearing a modest sweater and slacks, looking every bit the grieving father. He looked at Elena, then at Julian. He didn't say a word. He just smirked, a cold, triumphant curl of his lip, and tapped his wrist where a watch would be. Tick-tock. As the convoy drove away, leaving Elena collapsing into Julian's chest, Marcus's phone buzzed. He ignored the call from Tiffany. He sent a text to Elena's number. The Docks 42 warehouse was a relic of a bygone industrial era, rusting metal, dripping water, and the smell of salt and rot. It was the kind of place deals were made when the law wasn't invited. Marcus stood in the center of the empty floor, illuminated by a single hanging bulb. He felt invincible. The media was on his side. The law had given him the girl, and now the woman who humiliated him was about to hand him back his kingdom. The heavy metal door creaked open. Elena walked in. She was no longer wearing the emerald gown. She wore a sharp black trench coat, her hair pulled back tight. She looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but her steps were steady. "Where is she?" Elena demanded, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Where is Lily?" "Safe," Marcus said, leaning against a crate. "She's with a court-appointed guardian for the night. But tomorrow? Who knows? Maybe I'll take her to Switzerland. Or maybe I'll just put her in a boarding school and forget to visit. That's what rich dads do, right? You monster, Elena hissed. You don't love her. You never did. Love doesn't pay the bills, Elena, Marcus shouted, his composure cracking. You took everything from me. You embarrassed me in front of the entire city. Did you think I would just walk away? He pulled a document from his jacket pocket. This is a transfer of ownership, Marcus said, holding it out. You sign over 51% of Vanguard Global to me, and you reinstate me as CEO. In exchange, I sign this affidavit admitting I lied about the affair, and I grant you full, sole custody of Lily. I walk away, and you get your daughter back. Elena stared at the paper. You want the company? That's all this is about? You'd traffic your own child for a title? It's my legacy, Marcus screamed. Sign it. Elena walked forward slowly. She reached into her coat pocket. Marcus flinched, expecting a weapon, but she pulled out a pen. You're pathetic, Marcus, she said quietly. You think power comes from a title. You think respect comes from fear. Just sign the damn paper. Elena uncapped the pen. She hovered it over the document. Marcus's heart raced. He had won. He had actually won. There's just one problem with your plan, Elena said, pausing. What? Marcus snapped. You assumed I came alone. Marcus laughed. I checked the perimeter. No cops, no Blackwood. Just you. I didn't bring Julian, Elena said, her eyes turning icy. I brought the truth. From the shadows of the warehouse rafters, a red light blinked, then another. Then a massive projection screen rolled down from the ceiling, something Marcus hadn't noticed in the dark. What is this? Marcus backed away. Suddenly, the screen lit up. The audio boomed through the warehouse speakers. It was a video. But it wasn't from tonight. It was from 3 months ago. It showed Marcus sitting in his office at Vanguard. But he wasn't working on sales. He was meeting with a man, a notorious competitor from a rival firm, explicitly discussing how to sabotage Vanguard's stock price so he could buy it cheap later. I'll tank the Q4 numbers, Video Marcus said with a sneer. The old man, Arthur, won't notice. Once the stock drops, we buy in, and I take over. The video cut to another clip. Marcus forging signatures on expense reports. Marcus laughing about hiding assets in the Cayman Islands during his divorce proceedings to cheat Eleanor out of her settlement. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of color. Where? How did you get this? I told you, Marcus, Eleanor said, capping the pen and putting it back in her pocket. I was the one fixing your spreadsheets. I had your passwords. I had access to your cloud backups. I've been recording everything you did on your work devices for the last year. This is illegal, Marcus stammered. Actually, a voice boomed from the entrance behind him. Since it was on company property and company servers, it's entirely legal. It's called a compliance audit. Marcus spun around. Julian Blackwood stood in the doorway. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 6 federal agents wearing FBI windbreakers. Marcus Thorne, the lead agent shouted, stepping forward with handcuffs. You are under arrest for corporate espionage, embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury. No. Marcus backed away, stumbling over a crate. You can't! I have the girl! I have custody! Not anymore, Julian said, stepping into the light. He looked calm, deadly. While you were busy blackmailing Elena, my legal team presented this evidence to the emergency judge. The custody order was revoked 10 minutes ago. Lily is already back at my estate, watching cartoons and eating ice cream. Marcus looked from Eleanor to Julian to the FBI agents. The walls were closing in. His narrative, his leverage, his future. It was all dissolving like sugar in hot water. Elena, please! Marcus fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. Tears of a man who knew his life was over. "Don't let them take me. I'm Lily's father. Think of Lily. She can't have a father in prison." Elena walked over to him. She looked down at the man she had wasted 10 years on. The man who had called her boring. The man who had tried to sell their child for a CEO chair. She leaned down, her voice a whisper that cut deeper than any knife. "You're right, Marcus. Lily deserves better than a father in prison." She stood up and turned her back on him. "She deserves no father at all. Goodbye, Marcus." "Elena! Elena!" Marcus's screams echoed off the metal walls as the agents swarmed him, slamming him face first onto the concrete. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of grey stone and cold echoes, a place where hubris went to die. Inside courtroom 304, the air was thick, tasting of stale coffee and impending doom. It had been 6 months since the night at Docks 42, 6 months of investigations, frozen assets, and a media frenzy that had turned Marcus Thorne from a celebrated executive into a national punchline. Marcus stood at the defense table. The arrogance that had once defined him, the swagger, the shark-like grin, the way he used to look at people as if they were furniture, was gone. In its place was a hollowed-out shell of a man. His prison-issued orange jumpsuit hung loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds. His skin was sallow, the result of months without sunlight or expensive skincare routines. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He didn't look at the jury. He knew they hated him. He didn't look at the press gallery. He knew they were sketching his defeat. Instead, he looked at the back row of the gallery. There she was, Elena. She sat with a posture of absolute grace, wearing a cream-colored wool suit that cost more than Marcus's first car. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't frowning. She was simply present. Beside her sat Julian Blackwood, the titan of industry, looking like a dark sentinel. Julian's hand rested protectively on the bench behind Eleanor, not touching her, but close enough to signal to the world, "She's with me." "Mr. Thorne," the voice of Judge Reynolds boomed from the bench, cutting through Marcus's spiraling thoughts. The judge was an older man with eyes like flint, eyes that had seen every variety of white-collar criminal New York had to offer. "Please rise for sentencing." Marcus's lawyer, a court-appointed defender who had clearly given up weeks ago, nudged him. Marcus stood, his legs trembling. "Throughout this trial," Judge Reynolds began, his voice measured but lethal, "we have seen evidence of a man who believed himself to be above the moral and legal frameworks of this society. You didn't just embezzle funds, Mr. Thorne. You didn't just engage in corporate espionage." The judge paused, shuffling the papers on his desk. The sound was deafening in the silent room. "You weaponized the legal system against the mother of your child. You attempted to barter custody of an 8-year-old girl for a CEO title. The recordings presented by the prosecution paint a picture of a man so consumed by narcissism that he viewed his own family as currency to be traded." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that he did it for the legacy, for the family name. But the words died in his chest. "Your defense counsel argues for leniency, citing your past career achievements," Judge Reynolds continued, taking off his glasses. "But character is not measured by stock prices. It is measured by what we do when we think no one is watching. And when no one was watching, Mr. Thorne, you were a monster." The judge banged the gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "For the counts of grand larceny, securities fraud, and extortion, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10. You are remanded into custody immediately. 15 years. The number hung in the air. A collective exhale went through the courtroom. Reporters began typing furiously on their phones. 2 federal marshals moved toward Marcus. As they clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, cold, heavy metal against bone, Marcus turned his head one last time. He needed Eleanor to look at him. He needed her to acknowledge him, even if it was with hatred. Hate would mean he still mattered. Hate would mean he was still a player in her life. "Elena!" he rasped, his voice cracking. Elena didn't turn. She didn't even blink. She was looking down at her phone, showing something on the screen to Julian. Julian smiled, a warm, genuine expression that softened his sharp features, and whispered something in her ear that made her shoulders relax. Marcus realized with a crushing, suffocating clarity. She doesn't care. He wasn't the villain of her story anymore. He wasn't the antagonist. He was just a footnote, a typo she had corrected. "Let's go," the marshal grunted, shoving Marcus toward the side door. As the heavy door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate, Marcus Thorne vanished from the world of the elite, erased by the very woman he had tried to make invisible. 3 months later, the seasons had turned. The biting cold of winter had surrendered to the lush, vibrant promise of a New York spring. The cherry blossoms in Central Park were exploding in pink and white, mirroring the Renaissance happening inside the skyscraper at 40 Wall Street. The executive floor of Vanguard Global was unrecognizable. Under Marcus's reign, the office had been a boys' club. Dark mahogany walls, the smell of cigar smoke, heavy leather furniture, and an atmosphere of fear. Now the walls were glass, flooding the space with natural light. Modern art splashed color across the rooms. The silence of terrified employees had been replaced by the hum of collaboration. Elena Vance sat at the head of the massive quartz conference table. She was reviewing the Q2 projections. "Revenue is up 14%, George Holloway said, looking at the tablet in his hands with genuine admiration. George had been skeptical of Eleanor at first, but after 6 months of her leadership, he was her most loyal general. And the new ethical sourcing initiative, the public loves it. Our brand approval rating is the highest it's been in a decade. "Good," Eleanor said, her voice steady and authoritative. "But let's not get comfortable, George. We need to finalize the merger with the European logistics team by Friday. I don't want any loose ends." "Understood, Ms. Vance." As the team filed out, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, taking a moment to breathe. She spun the chair around to look out at the skyline. It was a view she used to think belonged only to men like Marcus. Now, it was hers. Her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Vance, you have a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal. Her name is Tiffany Ray." Elena stiffened. Her hand hovered over the button. Tiffany, the neon pink dress, the giggle, the woman who had been the catalyst for the worst year of her life. "Send her in," Elena said after a long pause. A moment later, the glass doors opened. Tiffany Ray walked in, but this wasn't the girl from the gala. The heavy, caked-on makeup was gone, revealing a face that looked younger, freckled, and tired. She wore a simple pair of black slacks and a modest blouse. She carried a white paper bag, twisting the handles nervously. "Ms. Vance," Tiffany said, her voice small. She stood near the door, as if afraid to step on the expensive carpet. I wasn't sure you'd see me." Elena stood up, crossing her arms. She didn't offer a smile, but she didn't attack. "I have 5 minutes, Tiffany. Why are you here?" Tiffany took a breath and stepped forward. "I wanted to apologize. Properly. I know I said it at the Gala when he got arrested, but I was scared then. I was just trying to save my own skin. She placed the white bag on the edge of the desk. I'm not in marketing anymore, Tiffany continued, looking down at her shoes. I went back home to New Jersey. I'm working at my uncle's bakery. I made these. They're lemon tarts. I remembered reading in an old company bio that you liked citrus. Elena looked at the bag, then back at Tiffany. You came all the way from Jersey to bring me pastries. I came to tell you that you were right, Tiffany said, tears welling in her eyes. He told me I was special. He told me I was smarter than you, prettier than you. He made me feel like a queen, so I wouldn't notice he was using me as a pawn. When I saw you that night, fighting for your daughter, fighting for your dignity, I realized I didn't want to be the other woman anymore. I want to be the kind of woman who builds her own empire. Elena's expression softened. She walked around the desk and stood in front of Tiffany. She saw the girl for what she was, another victim of Marcus's manipulation, just at a different stage. He was a master of making us feel small so he could feel big, Elena said quietly. Forgiveness is a heavy thing to ask for, Tiffany. I can't say I've forgotten. But I don't carry the anger anymore. It's too heavy to carry up the stairs to this office. Tiffany wiped her eyes. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Take a piece of advice, Elena added as Tiffany turned to leave. Don't let your story end with being the mistress. Write a new chapter. One where you're the protagonist. Tiffany smiled, a real, shaky smile. I'm trying. I started night school, business administration. Good luck, Tiffany. As the door closed, Elena let out a long breath. It felt like the final ghost of the past had just been exorcised from the building. I hope those are lemon tarts, a deep baritone voice came from the private elevator entrance. Elena turned, a smile instantly breaking across her face. Julian Blackwood leaned against the doorframe, looking impossibly dashing in a charcoal suit, holding 2 bottles of sparkling water. You were eavesdropping, Elena accused playfully. I was providing backup, Julian corrected, walking over to her. In case you needed someone to look menacing. But you handled it with your usual terrifying grace. He reached the desk, opened the bag, and took a tart. Not bad. Redemption tastes like lemon zest. Elena laughed, the sound bright and free. It's over, Julian. Really over. Marcus is gone. Tiffany is moving on. The company is safe. It is, Julian agreed. He brushed a crumb from his lip and looked at her. His expression shifted. The playfulness vanished, replaced by an intensity that made Eleanor's heart hammer against her ribs. Since the decks are cleared, Julian said, and since you are currently the most powerful woman in New York City, I have a business proposition. Oh? Eleanor raised an eyebrow, leaning against her desk. I'm listening, but my consultation fees are high, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not looking for a consultant, Julian said. He reached into his jacket pocket. I'm looking for a partner, a permanent one. Eleanor's breath hitched as he produced a small, velvet box. It wasn't black or red. It was a deep, rich emerald green. Julian didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't their style. They were equals. He stood right in front of her, eye to eye. Elena, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have watched you walk through fire. I saw you when you were broken, and I watched you rebuild yourself into titanium. I don't love you because you need saving. I love you because you don't. He opened the box. Inside sat a vintage ring, a massive, square-cut emerald surrounded by diamonds. It matched the dress she had worn the night she took her life back. It matched the fire in her eyes. I want to wake up every morning and wonder what you're going to conquer next, Julian whispered. I want to stand beside you while you rule the world. Marry me, Elena. Let's merge our empires. Elena looked at the ring, then up into the eyes of the man who had treated her like a queen when she had nothing. You know, Elena whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. Most men are intimidated by me now. I'm terrified of you, Julian grinned. That's why I have to marry you. It's the only way to ensure my safety. Elena laughed through her tears and nodded. Yes. Yes, Julian. Let's rule the world. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. As he pulled her in for a kiss, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the New York skyline in shades of gold and violet. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales were for children who needed magic to save them. This was a reality forged in steel and resilience. Elena Vance wasn't a princess waiting in a tower. She was the dragon, she was the knight, and she was the queen. And she had finally won the war. And that is the story of how one woman turned her deepest heartbreak into her greatest victory. Elena proved that dignity is quiet, but Karma is loud and it wears emerald velvet. Marcus thought he could discard her like an old toy, but he forgot the golden rule of life. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because you might have to look them in the eye on your way down. If you enjoyed this story of justice, revenge, and sweet redemption, please smash that like and share video.